trust. You build a trust. So it must be a family links or other people like that, and that's how it goes. And the situation was difficult before, but now people are coming out with every information. There are some volunteers now who are ready by the phone or by the Facebook to put in videos which you watch now, and to bring in news every minute of who surrendered from the police, who surrendered from the army, what's happening with the army, what's happening with the police, which we never heard this before. And the situation is people are becoming more aware of the situation that they can overthrow Gaddafi after 42 years of rooting his own generation and making people listen to him and make him the guru of Libya, but he's not. So in the situation here nowadays, we are claiming the victory against Gaddafi, and soon all Libya will be in the hands of the protesters who wants a democracy, a democratic leader, and human rights to be reinstated in the country.
Well, we'll certainly be watching developments in Libya very closely. For the moment, Bashir Lassabai from the Araya Human Rights Organization, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Well, at least 3 people have also been killed during anti-government protests in Yemen. That brings the total number of dead to 6 in the last 24 hours. The so-called Friday of Rage has drawn thousands of protesters onto the streets. Demonstrations have erupted across the country for an 8th straight day, as calls for the president to resign grow ever louder. And clashes have also erupted between pro and anti-government protesters in Jordan this time. At least 8 people were injured when scuffles broke out in the capital Amman after Friday prayers. Opposition supporters are demanding more freedoms and lower food prices. Many of the similar themes that we have heard across the region over the past weeks. Right, well, still to come on Al Jazeera's News Hour. Will the new U.S. Special Envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan improve its tense relationship with the countries? But first, tens of thousands of people returned to Cairo's Liberation Square on Friday to mark 1 week since Hosni Mubarak relinquished his powers as president. Thousands are still there. In the last couple of hours, they heard that the army was clamping down on strikes. Our correspondent Rawi Arage reports.
Draped in red, white and black, thousands of Egyptians come to Tahrir Square, this time not in protest, rather to mark their hard-won victory.
Contrary to the scenes of anger and frustration that lasted here in Tahrir Square for days before Hosni Mubarak stepped down, the mood this Friday is one of joy and celebration, smiles everywhere.
And a tribute to the country's military, who even before the end of Mubarak's rule last week was hailed for not obstructing the pro-democracy movement. The military had asked Egyptians to stop their protests, but it did not prevent the gathering on Friday. Instead, Tahrir was surrounded by tanks and soldiers who searched people and regulated traffic. The gathering not only a victory march, but also a memorial to the 300+ people who lost their lives in the uprising. The highlight of the day, an appearance by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, one of Sunni Islam's most prominent clerics. In a heartfelt ceremony, he praised the revolution, the youth behind it, and the military, though he did make a direct request.
I call on the Egyptian army to liberate us from the government that Mubarak formed in his last days. We want a new government that does not include the old faces that remind people of poverty and misery.
But he also urged patience with the country's interim military leadership. The current cabinet was appointed by Mubarak before he stepped down. A reshuffle is expected in the coming few days.
I came here all the way from Upper Egypt because all I want is an end to corruption. We want this government changed. We don't want Mubarak's party members in power.
It is true that we need to be patient, but at the same time we need to remind the government and whoever is there that we are still in the streets. And we still have a lot of other demands that they need to pay attention to.
An And until they see the country's 30-year emergency law lifted and the thousands of political prisoners released, many say they will keep the pressure. Rawi Rageh, AlJazeera, Cairo.
Egypt 1 week since the fall of Hosni Mubarak. Right, let's get some news from the Americas now, even though that's linked to the Middle East as well. Daljit Dhaliwal is in our Washington, D.C. broadcast center. Daljit, over to you.
Barbara, thanks very much. Well, the United Nations Security Council has failed to adopt a resolution condemning Israel's settlement building in the West Bank. And these are live pictures from the United Nations in New York. We see the U.S. Ambassador Susan Rice talking there. Now, the resolution was put forward by Palestinian leaders, but it was defeated on a 14-1 vote when the United States voted against it. Instead, U.S. officials have reportedly offered to support a non-binding presidential statement that effectively rejects the legitimacy of Israel's settlements. Let's listen in for a little while.
Makes it even more urgent to settle this bitter and tragic conflict in the context of a region moving towards greater peace and respect for human rights. But there simply are no shortcuts. We hope that those who share our hopes for peace between a secure and sovereign Israel and Palestine will join us in redoubling our common efforts to encourage and support the resumption of direct negotiations. While we agree with our fellow council members, and indeed with the wider world, about the folly and illegitimacy of continued Israeli settlement activity, we think it unwise for this council to attempt to resolve the core issues that divide Israelis and Palestinians. We therefore, regrettably, have opposed this draft resolution. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. I am delivering this statement on behalf of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. The United Kingdom, France, and Germany are seriously concerned about the current stalemate in the Middle East peace process. We each voted in favor of the draft Security Council resolution because our views on settlements, including in East Jerusalem, are clear. They are illegal under international law, an obstacle to peace, and constitute a threat to a two-state solution. All settlement activity, including in East Jerusalem, should cease immediately. Our primary goal remains a just and lasting resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We will continue to work actively to turn this ambition into reality. The creation of a sovereign, independent, democratic, contiguous, and viable Palestinian state, living in peace and security side by side with Israel. Our views are clearly set out in the European Union's Foreign Affairs Council conclusions, most recently in December 2009 and December